I'm gonna send an email to you and Cantor Shapiro because I know that she might be
Okay.
looking for some people for university for the high holidays. So between that and Kolenu, I thought you might be interested in that.
Sure, I would definitely be interested.
Cool. Hi, Claudia. Nice to see you. Okay, we'll wait a couple minutes before we start.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi, nice to see you. Hi, Merle. I see you're headed in the car. You must be going somewhere. I hope it's somewhere good. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, Arizona's got a law that we're not supposed to have phones on the car. So,
Oh, don't get pulled over.
well,
Don't get in trouble.
already driving, so you're on my knee.
Okay. Good. Good. Just don't get in trouble. It's not worth it. The Midrash does not want you to get arrested. That is not what the Midrash wants.
So, but I am going to turn the sound off because it's noisy.
No worries. Okay, we'll wait a couple minutes and then we'll get started. How's everyone doing? It's been a very heavy week. I kind of wanted to start by just asking how everyone's feeling, how everyone's doing. There's a lot going on between the conflict in Israel and Gaza and anti-Semitism rearing its ugly head, which of course is used anytime there's a conflict with the foreign government of Israel, which is a separate thing than the Jewish people. But c'est la vie. That is our journey as Jewish people. But everyone's doing well. Do any of you have family in Israel? We've been slowly kind of making our way as clergy through any members of the temple who have family in Israel to just reach out, make sure that everyone's okay. Obviously, they're all very scared, but this is unfortunately their reality. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen in a little bit. But I just wanted to do I see someone else is joining, a little refresher about what this class is about. This class is called Midrash and Merlot. I don't have Merlot today. I have Pinot Grigio. I've been up since, I don't know, we were having to film something and I was at University Synagogue since 7:15 this morning, and I literally just made it just in time to teach this class. So I'm glad that LA traffic wasn't so bad that I was trying to teach a class from the car, because that would be a true COVID experience. Hello. Okay, so last week we introduced the topic of Midrash, these rabbinic stories from the Talmud. We have Agadah and Halacha. Agadah are kind of more of these stories that the rabbis of the Talmud created based upon what they read in the text and what holes or questions they had while reading the text in order to make it make sense in a rational perspective, in order to make it make sense to them theologically. They fill in the gaps with their own interpretive. What we basically talked about was they come up with a story in order to explain the questions that they have. And I think in order for them to delve a little bit closer to the subject matter, we all know that through sharing our stories, it's how we grow closer to one another. I think it's the same as the text, that when we tell stories based upon text, it helps us to connect the text in a certain way. It helps us to expand the character that's being evaluated. A lot of times in the Torah, we don't get a lot of backstory. All of a sudden, a character appears and we're supposed to feel for that character, but we have no backstory of where they come from or what their history is, or really who they are. And so I think the rabbis, the Talmud, really felt this and felt the need to kind of give a little oomph to their story in order to better understand who these people were. We also talked a little bit 2 weeks ago about this idea of contemporary midrash and this idea that really anyone can create their own midrash. Anyone can create a story based upon the text in order to help them delve a little bit deeper into the issue that's presented, into the character and what they might be experiencing. So 2 weeks ago, for those of you who are just joining, we talked about the non-biblical character, but one that the rabbis come up with, and that is, hi, Cantor Shapiro, and that is Lilith. When you read the creation narrative in Breshit, you actually have 2 stories of the creation of man. And the ways that the rabbis solved this theological issue of, wait, why would we tell the story one way and then a few chapters later tell the story another way? They come up that Adam must have had another wife, but it didn't work out. Therefore, God had to start all over again, and that's how we got Eve. Eve was the good wife, and as we discussed 2 weeks ago, Lilith was the bad wife. And so the rabbis come up with this demonic character of Lilith, who throughout the Talmud, throughout kind of stories that Ashkenazic Jews tell each other, Lilith was the one who was responsible for miscarriage and infant death and the failure of marriage. It was this demon Lilith who was this spurned wife. And that's how the rabbis rationalized these 2 creation narratives. 2 weeks ago, we also read a lot of contemporary Midrashim of Lilith was someone who spoke their mind. Lilith was a strong, independent woman who was not about to take the role as lesser than her husband. And so through looking at these contemporary Midrashim, we have an attempt we have an opportunity through the lens of women's studies and the contemporary world to look at these texts in a totally different way, and the same way the history of the rabbis interpreted them, that we now take on that tradition and can interpret for ourselves. So I wanted to start. We're just going to say, I'm going to share my screen so that you can all see it. But I still want to make sure that I can see all of your beautiful faces. Beautiful. Everyone can see that? Excellent. Okay, so we'll just begin with the blessing for the study of Torah. I have it in Hebrew. I also have it in transliteration. But we are going to be studying today another section from Breshit, from Genesis. And this is the narrative of the turning of Lot's wife, Sodom and Gomorrah, that story, and how Lot's wife was told not to look back, and she looked back, and she turned into a pillar of salt. So we'll begin with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai our God, sovereign of all, who hallows us with the mitzvot, commanding us to engage with words of Torah. So as I said, we'll be studying the turning of Lot's wife, Genesis 19, 1 through 27. Last time we kind of did a round robin of anyone who wanted to read. Do we have any volunteers, or I could be a narrator for the evening? Your choice. Go ahead, Jennifer. Yes. Jennifer's my ringer. Just kidding.
The 2 angels arrived in Sodom in the evening, as Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to greet them, and, bowing low with his face to the ground, he said, "Please, my lords, turn aside to your servant's house to spend the night, and bathe your feet. Then you may be on your way early." But they said, "No, we will spend the night in the square." But he urged them strongly, so they turned his way and entered his house. He prepared a feast for them and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. They had not yet lain down when the townspeople, the men of Sodom, young and old, all the people to the last man, gathered about the house. And they shouted to Lot and said to him, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, that we may be intimate with them." So Lot went out to them to the entrance, shut the door behind him, and said, "I beg you, my friends, do not commit such a wrong. Look, I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you may do to them as you please, but do not do anything to these men, since they have come under the shelter of my roof." But they said, "Stand back. The fellow," they said, "came here as an alien, and already he acts the ruler. Now we will deal worse with you than with them." And they pressed hard against the person of Lot, and moved forward to break the door. But the men stretched out their hands and pulled Lot into the house with them, and shut the door. And the people who were at the entrance of the house, young and old, they struck with blinding light, so that they were helpless to find the entrance. Then the men said to Lot, "Whom else have you here? Sons-in-law, your sons and daughters, or anyone else that you have in the city, bring them out of the place. For we are about to destroy this place, because the outcry against them before the Lord has become so great that the Lord has sent us to destroy it." So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law, who had married his daughters, and said, "Up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city." But he seemed to his sons-in-law as one who jests. As dawn broke, the angels urged Lot on, saying, "Up, take your wife and your 2 remaining daughters, lest you be swept away because of the iniquity of the city." Still he delayed. So the men seized his hand and the hands of his wife and 2 daughters, in the Lord's mercy on him, and brought him out and left him outside the city. When they had brought them outside, one said, "Flee for your life! Do not look behind you, nor stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the hills, lest you be swept away." But Lot said to them, "Oh no, my lord! You have been so gracious to your servant, and have already shown me so much kindness in order to save my life, but I cannot flee to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me and I die. Look, that town there is near enough to flee to. It is such a little place. Let me flee there. It is such a little place, and let my life be saved." He replied, "Very well, I will grant you this favor too, and I will not annihilate the town of which you have spoken. Hurry, flee there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there." Hence, the town came to be called Zoar. As the sun rose upon the earth and Lot entered Zoar, the Lord rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah sulphurous fire from the Lord out of heaven. He annihilated those cities and the entire plain, and all the inhabitants of the cities and the vegetation of the ground. Lot's wife looked back, and she thereupon turned into a pillar of salt.
Thank you. That's always been a really tough story for me to read from the Torah. It's just a really difficult narrative. And what happens before this scene is that Abraham literally has an argument before God. God shows up to Abraham and says, "Look, there's this city. I don't know what they're doing. They're crazy. They're going against everything. I'm just going to wipe them clear off the planet." And in direct contrast to Noah, who just a few chapters earlier, we saw God do the same exact thing. These people, I made a mistake in making them. I'm just going to wipe them off the planet, and I'm going to start all over again. And Noah goes, "Cool, I'll build an ark. Everyone can get on board. We'll just start all over," right? Total disregard for human life. Abraham, on the other hand, is seen as the more righteous in our tradition, hence why we are the descendants of Abraham. And Abraham says, "God, what if I can find 50 righteous people?" And God's like, maybe. What if I can find 10? And he keeps narrowing down until God says, "Fine, if you can find these many righteous people, I will spare the city." And so we are introduced to the city of Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot's wife was mentioned like once in that story. Like, we know that Lot has a wife. It's mentioned that Lot has some daughters. And then all of a sudden she turns back and she's turned into a pillar of salt. She's punished in line with the city of Sodom and Gomorrah. So the rabbis kind of become fascinated with this character. Lot's wife is never named in the biblical narrative. And so they give her the title of, sometimes it's spelled Adit, A-D-I-T-H, or Adit, I-D-I-T. And they see her demise of being turned into a pillar of salt as a way to teach about her life even though we don't really know anything about her life from the biblical narrative. So they say that even though she was rescued by the angels from destruction of Sodom, she was ultimately stricken together with the other inhabitants of the city by turning into a pillar of salt. Therefore, based on this biblical narrative, the rabbis conclude that it must have been her actions and that really she was no different from those of Sodom's populace. So take one. Adit was jealous. Jealous of others, and this is from Numbers Rabbah, chapter 10, verse 5. Jealous of others, she offered no hospitality to her guests. The angels did not initially want to be her guests, but rather those of her husband Lot, since he was much more righteous. So here's why I've always had an issue with this narrative. If you harken back to the biblical text, is it not Lot over and over again who is like, no, I don't want to leave. I don't want to let these people in. And yet he's the more righteous one, because in their minds, he was saved. He made it to that little stretch of land called Zoar. So this is Genesis Rabbah, chapter 50, verse 6. It builds upon the earlier one. She was so jealous that she even tried to bar entry to the house. Lot's wife divided their house into 2 parts and told her husband, if you want to receive them, do so in your part, but I don't want anything to do with this. Take 2. The rabbis put Adit as the opposite of Abraham. If we remember from earlier in our biblical narrative, Abraham was so welcoming that his tent was always open on all sides, so that when those 3 angels, 3 strangers walked by, he literally ran out and offered them food and drink. Therefore, the rabbis say we should be like Abraham. And they come up with the narrative that Adit was the opposite of Abraham. This is Genesis Rabbah, chapter 50, verse 4. Lot wanted the members of his household to participate in the meritorious act of hospitality, as had Abraham, and he asked his wife to bring them salt. She responded, why do you even wish to learn this bad habit from Abraham? Any thoughts so far? I'll keep going. So this is Genesis Rabbah, 51 verse 5, further building on that idea. This one's the best. She finally complied with her husband's request, but she acted cunningly in order to remove the guests from her house. She went to all of her women neighbors to borrow salt. They asked her, Adit, why do you need salt? Why didn't you prepare enough beforehand for your family? She answered, I took enough for my own needs, but guests came to us in the middle of the night, and it is for them that I need salt. In this manner, all people of Sodom knew that Lot was harboring guests. So they stormed his house and demanded that he hand them over to the townspeople. Because she sinned through salt, Lot's wife was punished by being turned into a pillar of the same material. Are you sensing a pattern? Okay, here's another one. This is actually a good one. Adit as a loving mother. This is Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, Genesis Rabbah, chapter 50, verse 9. Another explanation for Lot's wife being transformed into a pillar of salt is based on her having 4 daughters, 2 married and 2 who were about to be married. The 2 married daughters and their husbands remained in the doomed city, as did her 2 future son-in-laws. When Lot and his wife were saved from the destruction of the city, she took pity on her married daughters who had remained in Sodom and looked behind her to see what their fate was. As soon as she saw the back of God, or the divine presence, the Shekhinah, she was transformed into a pillar of salt. So at least in that one, we have an understanding of the pain and the trauma that Adit must have had experienced to see her entire life blown up, including her 2 daughters who remained in the city. Remember earlier in the text, the 2 son-in-laws thought that Lot was just joking around. Like, what are you talking about? Nothing's going to happen. You're crazy, old man. So she turned around to see the destruction and the carnage. Let's not even forget that in the biblical narrative that we started off reading in this class, instead of the strangers, who does Lot offer up to the angry mob? Right? His daughters. She had to witness her husband offer up her daughters to a bunch of strangers to, I hope there's no children watching, to rape and pillage. And then she had to watch those same daughters and her neighbors and her, the lady that she talked to outside and the place where she'd grown up her entire life blow up before her very eyes. Of course she looked back. So at least that one has a little bit of nuance in understanding what the emotional just heaviness of what that moment must have been. I see a lot of perplexed faces. Go ahead.
Well, if I were going to write a midrash, I think I'd start by saying that Lot's wife, as she is called, was denied a voice in her home, which is exactly why she didn't come out to offer hospitality. And that when she left and turned back, she turned back out of compassion.
That's beautiful. And that's one of the reasons why I love Midrash so much, is these human elements, these backstories of what someone's existence. As you said, she had no voice in her household. Like we see in the biblical narrative, she literally has no voice. The angels are speaking to the Lot. The angels are telling Lot what's going to happen. The angels are dealing directly with the man of the house. And she's just standing there like, what am I supposed to do? She's literally has no voice. And yet the rabbis become fascinated with the idea that she has no voice and come to the conclusion that she must have done something wrong because she was punished. So through our study of Midrashim and through our understanding the mental and emotional heaviness of what she must have experienced, we now can give a voice to Adit. We can now give a voice to Lot's wife, that she didn't turn into a pillar of salt for nothing. Okay, so the next one I'm going to read is Ibn Ezra. And Ibn Ezra is one of the most distinguished Jewish biblical commentators and philosophers of the Middle Ages. He was born in northern Spain. And the reason why Ibn Ezra is so lauded is that in his commentary, he sticks to a very literal interpretation of the text. So he kind of avoids all of this rabbinic stories or Kabbalistic interpretations like we've kind of been reading, where basically they create a whole new narrative. So he exercised independent criticism that, according to some writers, exhibits like an early kind of rationalism of how it deals with the Torah text. And so what Ibn Ezra says is that Lot's wife became a netziv, which is similar to the word matzeva, a monument literally of salt. Because it says in the text, there seems to have been a flow of hot sulfur and fire from what God cast on the city of Sodom. This would have burned her body and converted it to a monument of salts. There must have been a miraculous narrow path through the river for the family of Lot to run, but it was so close to the explosion that it could easily grab them and pull them into the carnage and destruction. The moment Lot's wife looked back, she was grabbed by that river of sulfur. So at least that has some kind of, in Ibn Ezra's understanding, a rational explanation. We know that from the biblical text that it rains down sulfur from the skies. And his interpretation is that she stopped just long enough that she became like collateral damage of the explosion. It wasn't that she did something wrong, but she was part of the explosion zone. And because she stopped, because she had perhaps what you said, that compassion of, what am I witnessing? Who are the people who are still stuck there? Should I go back and help them? That she was just collateral damage. Okay. But it goes on. So it continues and it says that this compassion, which I think we all can agree, it showed for Adit that she turned around because like that was home. She considered herself a part of that society. And that's why it says in the text, lest you are wiped out, and they put parentheses, together with the locals within the sin of this city. Therefore, she herself became a monument for them. They had no monuments, but she who did not belong because she was told to leave, but decided to attach herself to the city, to her brethren, to the place where she was born. And because of that, ended up as collateral damage. And that was the punishment, as she became a monument to them. Any thoughts? It's more of a rationalist interpretation. It uses the actual text to explain what could have been a natural occurrence of an explosion. She's caught in the debris. She turns into a pillar of salt. I think I saw a hand.
I was thinking so first of all, when I was reading it, I somehow had forgotten the part about Lot offering his own daughters up to the strangers. So that kind of shocked me. And I guess I had blocked that part of the story out.
It's a little teaser for what's to come at the end of the story.
Yeah. But also I found myself wondering, is there maybe some part of her that didn't want to leave, that really wanted to stay with her brother, with her daughters and their husbands, and maybe was so conflicted that she actually thought, I would rather just die here, and then became a pillar of salt?
Absolutely. I almost see Lot as the opposite, but not necessarily in a bad way, of like when God comes to Abraham and says, leave everything that you know, leave the place of your parents and go to a land that I will show you. And Abraham's like, yeah, sure. I don't care about that. I'm just going to go. As opposed to Adit, who is literally told to leave because you're going to die in fire and brimstone. But instead she was connected to this place, and she loved this place, and she loved the people that were in it. And perhaps it was a decision. Go ahead. Hi.
Hi. I had to walk away for a second. So if you touched on this part, please forgive me. But, she also just witnessed her husband saying, yeah, don't abuse these men, but just go ahead and take my daughters and do whatever you want with them.
Totally. I saw, in preparing for this class, I saw fascinating. I mean, I would consider it Midrash Shame. So the way that I look at contemporary Midrash Shame, there's lots of poetry about Adit. And this was a paper that was written about PTSD. And the way that trauma can literally put you into a catatonic state. And that this pillar of salt was that she just became just a time capsule of her trauma, to where she literally could not break free. She turned to stone. She had strangers come in the middle of the night, an angry mob outside of her door. We already established she has no voice within her own household. So her husband was probably like, shut up, I'm going to answer the door. The husband, as you said, offers her daughters, don't beat up these guys. And really it's, don't rape these guys. You can rape my daughters. And then she's running through the desert and hears an explosion and turns around and literally witnesses everything that she had ever known blow up before her very eyes. And so this paper that I read was that she was literally, that she turned into a catatonic state of trauma. Go ahead, Merle.
I feel like, I've never read that much about Lot or his wife, but I feel like with what I've read and what little I've read and listening to this story, I'm trying to take it all in and process it, but I feel like there was so much conflict going on around her that she was looking for any way to get out of the conflict. And if it meant that she was the creating the conflict in whatever her behavior was, then this was the easiest way for her to get out of it. Just run away and suffer the consequences, and the consequences were the pillar of salt. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know, you look at people nowadays and you talk about the PTSD. I mean, I know people that have PTSD and they can't handle their lives no matter how much counseling they get or how
They
much help
become
is available.
frozen.
They do become frozen. And I mean, even people with illnesses that can't handle it, your whole body, your whole mind, your whole body becomes frozen. So that's where I'm looking at it at, is that was her way of just getting out of the conflict. She couldn't control it, so let's just run away and whatever happens, happens.
That's really interesting. So this kind of translate into this next contemporary Midrash Shame, which is basically, I'll read it. Lot's wife turned into a pillar of salt because she looked back, longing for what had been, rather than looking forward to what could be. She's a metaphor for our being stuck in the past and unable to move forward when change literally knocks at our door. But there's more to the story. Salt, a valley or low place that is burning. Angels who deliver a message, men who guide the family toward the hills. That this story warns us of the trouble with being stuck in the past. And what they're saying is that what the angels gave her was a roadmap for navigating change. But that oftentimes when dramatic things occur in our life, we, especially change, right? Change, the unknown, that is a terrifying place. I am a type A personality, and to sit in the unknown is a very scary place for me. And rather than sit in the unknown, that she looked to the past, that she just wasn't going to deal with it and would just rather, as you said, Merle, like just deal with what that past had been. She wasn't ready for that next step. She was frozen in time. She couldn't move past it. So it says that hear the story of Lot, and that what her demise is, her punishment, as the rabbis of the Talmud, some of them, Rabbi Eliezer, not so much, he's very advanced for his time, that it encourages us to, when change literally comes knocking on the door, that we take it, and that we literally, the same way that Lot and his wife were told to head for the high ground, we head for the high ground. That we leave behind the past, and that we take the opportunity and see where it takes us. So that was one interpretation, which I thought was really interesting. Any thoughts on that one? The idea of being grounded in the past. My husband is literally outside the door. I'm looking out towards our street, and he thinks it's really funny to stand in front of me as he just came home. So that is why I was distracted just now. It's called a Zoom bomb. That's what my husband just did to me. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen again, because this one is a long one. It's kind of a poem short story. And this is a modern interpretation. Jennifer, do you want to be our narrator again? You do such a great job.
Sure.
If not, I can read.
No, it's fine. The turning of Lot's wife. First of all, she had a name and she had a history. She was Mara, and long before the breath of death's angel turned her to bitter dust, she had slipped from her mother's womb with remarkable ease, had moved in due time from infancy to womanhood, with a manner of grace that came to be the sole blessing of her aging parents. She was beloved. And like most daughters who are beloved by both a mother and a father, Mara moved about her city with unflinching compassion, tending to the dispossessed as if they were her own. And they became her own. In a city given to all species of excess, there were a great many in agony, abandoned men, abandoned women, abandoned children. Upon these she poured out her substance and her care. Her first taste of despair was at the directive of the messengers, who announced without apparent sentiment what was to come and what was to be done. With surprising banality, they stood and spoke. One coughed dryly into his fist and would not meet her eyes, and one took a sip from the cup she offered before he handed it back, and the two disappeared into the night. Unlike her husband, coward and sycophant, the woman remained faithful unto death. For even as the man fled the horrors of the city's conflagration, outrunning Mara and both girls as they all rushed into the desert, the woman stopped. She looked ahead briefly to the flat expanse, seeing her tall daughters, whose strong legs and churning arms were taking them safely to the hills. She saw, farther ahead, the old man whom she had served and comforted for 20 years. In the impossible interval where she stood, Mara saw that she could not turn her back on even one doomed child of the city, but must turn her back instead upon the saved.
Thank you. Any thoughts on that one? Yeah, when I read that too, I was like, oh, that's a good one. It flips the whole narrative, right? Because in the Talmudic understanding and the rabbi's understanding for the most part is that Adit wasn't a righteous person. But there's absolutely nothing in the text other than what happens to her that should lead us to that conclusion. And instead, this flips that entire idea on its head, that she was actually the righteous one. She was the one who, even though her city was full of sin and maybe there wasn't some great things, that she was the one who was constantly reaching out to people and making sure that people were taken care of, making sure that her daughters were taken care of. And at that last second, when she could have turned her back on all of those people, she refused. And instead, she gave up her own family, her own life, for the ultimate sacrifice of others.
But it also gives her a roadmap to leave, although by dying, a situation in this narrative, a situation in marriage, a man she is not happy with, or she doesn't respect. But that was beautiful. That was really beautiful.
Thanks.
Mm.
Go ahead.
It also strikes me that it's the people who do the smallest acts who are often silent in our society.
Mm.
And that's exactly what's being illustrated here.
And they're forgotten.
And they're forgotten, and they don't have what you would consider a voice in society, and yet their voice is precisely the acts that they engage in day after day after day with no recognition and no reward.
The quiet one working behind the scenes while her husband got all of the accolades for offering her daughters up. Go ahead, Merle.
That happens a lot with people that are very shy. That they may do all this wonderful work, but they don't even, and in a lot of cases, and I could say myself included, for most of my life, or half of my life, that I just wanted to do the work. I didn't let my ego get in the way. And as a result, I just didn't take the credit that I should take, because I kept saying, well, let everyone else have it.
Yeah.
And that was a product, I think, of my being so shy growing up. I just wanted to do it and get it done, and I wanted to be there for everyone else. But then in the end, if you don't recover from that, then, and I did, but if you don't recover, and I had wonderful people to tell me, just speak up, and you can be egocentric once in a while. But it takes a lot for a lot of people to be able to do that. Well, a lot of people just sit there, I'll do it, and then they get upset when they don't get any credit. I guess I give her credit for just running away, as hard as that is. But it's a current problem with a lot of people as well as then.
Yeah, 100%. The one thing that I always come back to is in the text that we read, the original biblical text, what did Lot do that was so righteous? Right? Like, the angels come, they knock on the door. He doesn't want to let them in. They tell him that the city's going to be destroyed. I guess he defended them and then gave his daughters. I don't think that's righteous. And then they tell him to leave, and he drags his feet 3 times until finally it's his wife and his children that are literally grabbing him by the hand and running him out of the house. And so it's always just kind of been lost on me how they came to the conclusion that Lot was so righteous. And let's not forget what happens after Adit turns into a pillar of salt is the 2 daughters and the husband run off to the mountains to this safety zone. And the daughters are like, what are we going to do? We were supposed to get married. We were supposed to have children. There's going to be no one to carry on our line. Let's get our father drunk and have him impregnate us so that we can continue our line. And the daughters of the sons, which are given Moab, right? That's the Moabites. And then I think the other one is Ben Ami, so the Ammonites. So these are the tribes that we're not supposed to be like. So how does that all make sense?
Did those 2 tribes not like each other either?
I can't remember off the top of my head, but I know the Israelites were definitely not supposed to like them.
Right. Okay.
So it's this total contrasting narrative of Abraham and Lot were family. They have an argument. Lot goes off. He gets rich. He finds this land. He turns his eyes towards Sodom. Abraham's still on his journey. So we have these 2 splitting narratives of this is who we are. This is who we aren't. And yet in this particular text, that Lot, the person who we're not supposed to be like, right? That's not the line that we descend from. That's considered the righteous person in this story. That's what I've never really understood in terms of the pieces. Any thoughts on that? It makes sense the other 2. Here's one side, here's the other. We are the descendants of Abraham. Lot did the wrong thing, Sodom and Gomorrah. We have this whole story. But then when the rabbis go back, that Lot was more righteous than Adit, someone who we know absolutely nothing about from the actual biblical text.
So I have a question. When the story of Lot's wife is taught in a more conventional manner, what is the conventional parable here?
I would say the conventional parable is the mixture of that she looked back and was stuck in the past. And the other one is that the conventional is that she must have done something wrong. Therefore, she's a monument for all of us to remember. It kind of stops there. I for some reason have this visceral memory of being in religious school, and most of religious school you get the greatest hits of the Torah. So you have the creation narrative and Noah and let's sing the song about Noah's Ark, but really that's kind of genocide. And then Lot's wife, and I was like, what did she do that was so wrong? It's always been a really disturbing part of the narrative, of the creation narrative to me, of the creation of people, is what are we supposed to learn from this woman's story? And so through the lens of these contemporary Midrashim, the way that we can fill in her story and fill in her trauma and fill in her compassion to, she was either just so Mara, so bitter that she was stuck. She literally couldn't move past that moment in her life. She was in a catatonic state. I also love the interpretation that she had so much compassion that she wasn't willing to abandon her people. So she literally sacrificed herself for them. But in terms of like the traditional interpretation, it's normally that she must have done something wrong. Which we read the text. It's just not the case.
But is it because of the assumption that, this is going to sound awful, that women were of lesser value than men? I mean, it's a guess. I'm looking at it from my sociological background.
I mean, no, I think you are right on target, which is why it's so important for Jewish women to go back and study these texts and to put a different spin on it. What did we study 2 weeks ago? Lilith was bad, and then who committed the sin? Eve, right?
Right.
We're having we have Lot and we have Adit. And who's in the wrong?
Adit,
the woman, the lesser than.
I just don't, and I have always, I mean, I don't get how way back then, I mean, thousands and thousands of years ago, how did anyone determine who was the lesser in this case of the two, or in Eve and Lilith? How does anybody determine?
The way that it was determined is that Lot lived and Edith didn't.
Yeah.
Adit got caught as collateral damage, seen as God punished Adit, and Lot got to go on and technically fathered 2 other nations. And so in the theological understanding of that time period and also of these rabbis, it's this like, the bad get punished, which is just not our understanding of the world. We have a much broader understanding of the world of that good people, bad things happen to, and bad things, good people happen to, and vice versa. And there's really no rhyme or reason to how it goes. All we can do, and I think it's one of the best things about our tradition, all we can do is control how it is that we respond to these things. And by looking at Torah, by looking at these narratives, we learn how to respond and how to treat other people when those things ultimately happen. But in this much more narrow understanding of the world was much more black and white, and there wasn't a gray. Okay, I'm going to leave you guys with one more. I'm just going to read it. Unless do you guys want to look at it? Do you prefer to look at it, or if I read it, that's cool?
No, that's okay.
Okay. So this is called, Of Course She Looked Back. You would have too. From that distance, the shivering city fit in the palm of her hand. With unflinching compassion, tending to the dispossessed as if they were own. And they became her own. In a city given to all species of excess. Wait, that's the wrong one. Sorry. My pages got confused. There we go. Okay, I'm starting again. Of course she looked back. You would have too. From that distance, the shivering city fit in the palm of her hand like she owned it. She could have blown the whole thing. Markets, dance halls, hookah bars, sent the city and its 100 harems tumbling across the desert. Like a kiss, she had to look back. When she did, she saw pigeons glinting like debris above, ruined rooftops, towers swaying, women in broken skirts strewn along burned-out streets, like busted red bells. The noise was something else. Dogs wept, roosters howled, children and guitars popped like kernels of corn, feeding the twisting blaze. She wondered, had she unplugged the coffee pot? The iron? Was the oven off? Her husband uttered, keep going, whispered, stay the course, or baby, just forget about it. She couldn't. Now a bursting garden of fire, the city bloomed to flame after flame. Like hot fruit in a persimmon orchard, someone thirsty asked for water. Someone scared asked to pray. Her daughters or the crooked-legged angle, maybe. Dark thighs of smoke opened the sky. She meant to look away, but the sting in her eyes, the taste devouring her tongue, and the neighbors just begging her name.
Oh.
Right? The horror. Like, what was she supposed to do? Turn her back on humanity? Literally, people are dying in the streets around her, and she's just supposed to look the other way? That's the righteous thing to do? What happened to Pekuach HaNefesh? What happened to saving any soul? Right? It didn't matter who they were. She wasn't going to abandon them.
That's just so, I don't even know. She didn't want to abandon them. And how can you abandon them? There's now, whenever, there's so much help that's needed.
Yeah, I just, rereading this narrative and rereading some of these contemporary Midrashim, with everything that's going on in Israel and Gaza, I just imagine literally like the bombs and the explosions going overhead, and it's just chaos, and you see someone in the street and they need your help, and instead you go the other way, or instead
it disappeared.
Oh, hello? Hi. And instead you say no. I don't care who you are. I don't care what your background is. I don't care what you did. I don't care what your sin was. I don't care what your vice is. You are a human being, and I'm going to stop, and I'm going to turn around, and I'm going to help you.
And that's, maybe from this story is how we've learned to become who we are, that we're always, people are always asking for some kind of help, and we all, even if they don't directly ask for it, we can sense it, and we just jump in and we do it, whatever we can do.
And how often do we see it around us, but we just keep going on our journey? Because that's not part of what our journey is.
No, but I always, and this kind of goes along with the medical ethics class the other night, where, and I forget what they call it, where, you don't want to stop and help somebody because of the fear of the lawsuit. And I remember as a very young child, we'd be driving around Los Angeles somewhere, and we'd see a horrible accident. And I would say to my father, who was a very well-known doctor in Beverly Hills, and I would say, well, what, maybe you should stop and help see if that person needs help till somebody gets there. And he'd say, no, I can't, because if I get sued because their doctor or they didn't like what I did, then we would have nothing.
Yeah.
And when they were talking about it the other night in the medical ethics class, I'm like, oh my God, here we go again, that you really want to stop and help these people. But I was 12, there was nothing I could do to help, but for a long time, I didn't understand why my father said that. But now I understand it, because people are lawsuit crazy.
Yeah.
But it always bothered me that you want to help people, but sometimes you have to be careful who you're helping, who you reach out to.
Yeah.
I guess that, maybe this is where it all came from originally.
Maybe. I definitely think that, and this is my own interpretation, I think the rabbis got it wrong. I think we are meant to look at this story, and I think we are meant to see the humanity. I don't think there is anything within Lot's character that is a redeeming quality. I think he whines, he doesn't listen, he's kind of mean about it, he offers his daughters up, and there's nothing wrong to say that biblical characters make mistakes. They make mistakes all the time, but us reading them, it's literally supposed to be like a mirror that's held up in front of us of, wait, have I done that before? Because right now I'm having this very strong reaction to like Lot is not a righteous person. Adit is not giving the right chance. But like, how often have I been put in situations like this, or I've seen situations like this and I don't do anything about it?
Well,
So
and it's
to me-
another,
Maybe they can
yeah,
put your
I mean,
foot
he's taking all the credit for what she did or attempted to do. And
Yeah,
that's the other end of being, let's be a little egocentric here.
Yeah. So to me, in what has become the traditional interpretation, and granted, this is like a very small piece. Most people kind of brush over the whole Sodom and Gomorrah. They don't really think about Lot's wife. But this is just one that's always stuck out to me in that they got this one wrong. Like, we're supposed to look at this story, and it doesn't matter who they are. Like, they are still humans, and those people deserve someone to stop and help them. And I think that we see this in later iterations of biblical narratives. It makes me think of Kriyat Hayam, the separation of the sea, right? And there's a midrash. The angels are singing, and they're singing to God, Micha Mocha, everything's so great, song of victory. And in the midrash, the God turns to the angels and says, how could you celebrate? How could you dance around while my children are drowning? We're talking about Pharaoh and his army here. While how can you celebrate? How can you be happy that another set of people are suffering, are dying? And so I think that we see in the biblical narrative not only an evolution of the different human characters that we meet, but I'm often very fascinated by the personality arc that God has. God in Breshit in Genesis is very different than the God in Exodus, and is very different God than the one in Leviticus. And so we see a very early iteration of God, a destructive God, a God that punishes people who doesn't do what God says.
People that think they're God.
Yes, people that think they're God. Like,
This is actually a very modern story when you think about it.
when you reflect and you put your own experience and your own lived experience towards it, it becomes a very modern story. Not one to just brush over of like, oh, that's the Genesis narrative. Like, oh, Sodom and Gomorrah, they were all a bunch of sinners. Like, good thing we got rid of them. Like, there's some real, like, humanitarian conflict in there, and like different areas that you can hold of how you feel about the situation.
That's for sure. Thank you for this. This puts a whole new light on some of these stories.
Good. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that. I'll see you guys, I think, in 2 weeks, when I think we're going to delve into a different book of Torah. I haven't totally thought about it yet, but we might stick with Genesis.
This is great. Thank you so much.
Good. We'll send out the source sheets so that you guys can have some of that poetry, because I think some of that poetry is just really, really beautiful. Really beautiful. But this is just more of my plug that Midrash Shame just allows us to rethink about text and to delve into it. And the same way that Mara, you so beautifully created like your own Midrash, like for that brief second, that we have an opportunity to do the same and to literally la'asok b'divrei Torah, engage in Torah in a totally new and fresh way with a modern spin.
Yeah, I always felt like this story was just sort of strange and disturbing in a way. So it's nice to kind of get another window in.
Good. I'm glad that you found it at least interesting.
You know,
I wanted to offer something positive because I didn't want to be Mara.
Bitter, salt, all goes together. Okay, well, thank you guys so much for joining. I'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for
Thank
making
you.
this
Thank you,
happen.
Lisa.
Thank you.
Of course. Hope you guys have a great weekend and early Shabbat Shalom.
You too. Shabbat shalom.
too.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone. Night.